So we're going to go straight in and look at who should use EPS. Now, the simple answer to this really is any person or team that has repetitive requirements, either perhaps within that particular project or things that you do from project to project on a regular basis. Now, there were some examples in the why video that preceded this. For example, when you have a rating scale, you tend to want to do the same sorts of tables. So rather than re-script that from project to project, you can build a template that just then calls the types of tables that you want, so that users just literally have to just check off what types of tables they want and will automatically get the tables they need accurately and correctly. Now, EPS is ideal where we've got differently skilled teams. So if you've got a team maybe of 6 or 7 people, you'll have experienced MRDCL users or highly skilled MRDCL users who then can be used to do the more difficult work, while new users or junior staff can actually do all of the more simple work. And it means that teams can work together so that more skilled people do the difficult parts of a project and less skilled people or people learning can do the easier parts of the project. So really, any situation where consistency will improve productivity is a good place to use EPS. And what EPS will mean is that, for example, when you're doing a rating scale table, to use that example, it will always be done in the same way, which makes it very easy for different people to pick up different people's work. EPS needs an EPS manager. It could be the same person as the person who does the development as well, but there are 2 distinct roles. Somebody who decides what EPS is developed, and somebody who manages that, and somebody who actually does the development work. Now, that could be the same person, but in many cases it's not. So to manage EPS, you want somebody who can appraise what EPS templates will help the most. So what things are people doing regularly? Is it spending a lot of time doing rating scales? Is it a lot of time doing data corrections? What sorts of things are people taking a lot of time doing, so that a standard way of inputting that information through a spreadsheet would actually save time for everybody and have it in an organised way, which would make it very easy to manage both by other people and perhaps in the future, particularly where it's a tracking study or a project that might be repeated. And you want to ensure, if you're developing these templates, that they're flexible enough for all needs. So there's no point developing a template, let's stick with the example of rating scales, that does some of the types of tables you want from rating scales, but perhaps doesn't consider people who want a top 2 box and a bottom 2 box, as well as the distribution of all of the responses for a rating scale. So really thinking about all the different uses of a type of requirement is really key to developing good EPS templates. And so a manager might be able to look at all the work that's carried out and appraise that and choose all the tools and select all the tools that are needed so that it encompasses everybody's work and as much of the types of work that are needed in the future. And obviously that takes maintenance. There's always new requirements, so adding new things in, of course, is important. And of course, if somebody's managing that, that makes it easier as well. And helping others to find and use the EPS templates, documenting what they do, how to use some perhaps complex EPS templates to make work easier, again, is important. Even having short videos teaching people how to use a particular template could be useful where it's doing something that's quite complex, but also in a very efficient way. So considering productivity periodically is always a good idea. It's very easy to drop in ways of doing things so that they're done perhaps in a slightly inefficient way. So team meetings to discuss things is always a good way of working. And it also ensures that everything is done in a consistent way. So consistent use really does improve productivity. And I would say one thing, that in a team, the person that perhaps should be managing the EPS isn't necessarily the most talented MRDCL user. Sometimes MRDCL users can be very creative and find really good ways to solve problems, but they're perhaps not the best ones to actually think about how to approach a problem that may arise. So it isn't necessarily the most talented MRDCL person that becomes the best manager of the EPS scripts and development. And EPS needs a developer. So it needs somebody who certainly is very proficient as an MRDCL user. They'll need to have a good knowledge of MRDCL before they can start to develop EPS templates. You would expect them as a minimum to really have a good understanding of do loops and the MRDCL preprocessor, particularly things like set commands and skip commands, because they become things that become important tools within an EPS script. EPS scripts, though rather interesting, don't actually use many techniques. So somebody learning to develop EPS will need some time to get proficient at developing the script, but actually they don't use very many tools. So it's complex and a steep learning curve, but actually quite a short learning curve. And actually once people have done one or two templates using made EPS scripts, you'll find that that person can then produce others relatively quickly and get into a technique and a way of working that enables them to produce them efficiently. It helps, of course, if they can understand productivity concepts and understand what their colleagues are doing so that they can implement these scripts. And of course, testing is important because if they're going to be shared by teams, even teams across the world share EPS templates, to my knowledge, they need to work and not have flaws in them or not cover pretty much everything anybody wants to do. In the previous video, we also covered examples of where EPS will help, but it's been repeated in this video just in case you haven't watched the previous one. So handling open-ended questions and code lists is a very good use of EPS. It means that the person who's writing the script in MRDCL should have to just set a reference to a workbook and a worksheet, and automatically the brands or codes that are in that open-ended code list can be drawn in without any further scripting. And if it's changes, that script should automatically read in the changes to the codes. Entering data corrections is a good way of using EPS. It means you can have an audit trail of data corrections and even who made the data corrections, and get back and trail what's happened to the original data that was collected. Producing tables and rating scales, we've already mentioned, and even specifying all the tables, or certainly all the simple tables, can be done through a spreadsheet with an EPS template. Assigning codes to subtotals is another good use. So if you've got some codes where you want to make subtotals, perhaps codes 1, 3 and 5, and needing a subtotal, that can all be specified very easily and overtly through an EPS template, making it easy for others to see what's going on. And tracking studies work really well in EPS templates. Tracking studies are notorious for having little changes from quarter to quarter or wave to wave, and they can all be documented nice and tidily in a spreadsheet, which makes it very easy to go back to maybe in 2 years' time to see what's happened in the tracking study and which questions are present and missing perhaps at particular waves. You can see when they were added to a questionnaire on a tracking study, for example. And any questionnaire differences can be managed very tidily through a EPS template. Applying text and brand lists, another good use. But there's more ideas than this. It's anything that you do from project to project that will benefit by being put into an EPS script template. So who should use EPS? Well, I think in this case it's everyone. There's very few people I think that will benefit from using EPS within MRDCL. It will improve productivity, it will reduce errors, and it will mean things are done in a more consistent way much more quickly. So that completes these videos. There's more videos in this EPS series that actually get into the usage of EPS, and the next video in the series shows you the real basics of EPS before going on to some more complex and more practical examples. Thanks for watching.